we come together, all of us, and we try to find and create a system that all of us can kind of agree with.
Yeah.
So you find agencies like ILO or UNDP or World Bank, whatever it is, trying to get, and in these meetings, countries are arguing because they don't want you to create some kind of methodology that puts them at a disadvantage. So at the end of the day, everybody is trying to push their own narrative. But the stronger countries, the bigger countries are the ones going to determine, at the end of the day, the international best, what we call the international best practice. That's why in this situation, you hear 1 hour is being used, because in many of their countries, 1 hour makes sense. You can and when people are talking of international comparison, there's no comparison there for two things. 1 hour work in the US or in the UK is not the same as 1 hour work in Nigeria, but because they dominate those conversations, they put a lot more money into it. They dominate those conversations. They're going to probably get their weight for the most part. Nevertheless, you don't find many of these countries using everything. So when you say international best practice, you might have most countries that agree with 1 hour, not all of them, but they might, and even the countries that agree with 1 hour with other aspects of the best, so-called best practice, they will disagree. Some countries will use 15 to 64. Some will use 15 till whenever you want to stop working. Others start with 18. So there are still variations across countries. And the countries, so countries are allowed to tweak that. All ILO does give you a baseline, general guidelines, and then countries can tweak around it to suit whatever their needs are. That's how international best practice is set.
Gotcha.
The third part is there's always a mismatch between the producers of data and the users of data, particularly the policymakers, because they hardly ever talk to each other. And I remember when I was there for 10 years, they had to create a system, particularly in African countries, where the ministers of planning and budget, they created a system where they were actually had to talk with the heads of statistics agencies, because the producer of data are just producing their own in line with whatever benchmarks, and it doesn't speak to what the policymakers are. And that's the entire point of data, or rather the most important point of data is evidence-based policy decisions, to give policymakers the tools they need to understand the problems, profile solutions, and monitor the impact of those problems. So if you have a situation where the data you're producing and the methodology you are using to produce it is different from the target of the policymaker, there's a problem. So creating that mismatch, I'll give you an example, very quick example, here out of time. If you remember if you look at the GDP reports and look at transportation, road transportation, you see a huge contraction of 5%. Yeah. Even though that was just 1 month of the quarter, the last month. Then if you compare that last month with the inflation numbers, the inflation numbers suggest that there was very little impact in that month. And that's because NBS says they are now doing it for only 2 weeks.
Gotcha.
So those two numbers, your data is supposed to tell you a story of the economy. It's not supposed to be just isolated incidences data that don't speak to each other. You have to ensure everything, you're trying to come up with a total picture. So if you are saying, you look at road transportation, you see minus 55% contraction in road transportation, even though it's just 1 month of subsidy removal, and that's probably the reason. And then you look at the same month's inflation numbers, and there's very little impact, nothing happened. And those two numbers are not speaking to each other, and then it misleads policymakers. So and then this is how the 20 hours that was there was used was created. So when I started, it was 40 hours. NBS was computing unemployment as a definition. The definition was if you're not in full-time employment, you're unemployed. And the reason was Nigerian policymakers were promising Nigerians full-time employment. So they want to know whether they are performing in terms of providing full-time, but not 1 hour employment. Now, if you want the policy and the data to match, policymakers either have to now come out and say, all we are guaranteeing Nigerians is 1 hour. Then the methodology works. But if the methodology is focused on 1 hour, and policymakers are trying to look for full-time employment, you're not really helping them.
Gotcha.
And at the end of the day, the data is just there for the textbooks and for researchers and for international comparison, anything like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the policymakers can't use it. And I repeat, the most important use of data is to provide information for policy, because not for international comparison. International comparison is good, but that cannot be the main. You have to ensure that your policies and your data that you're using
marry.
You're not producing data for the sake of it. Data is for the use. If the data user cannot use the data because it doesn't speak to what they want, then it's just a waste of time. So this is why I resisted for 10 years, because it did not make any sense in terms of providing the information that policymakers need. So that 20 hours was set because the committee that was set up, which included the ILO, by the way.
Okay.
So there were 30 of them. Including university professors, UNDP, some newspapers, Population Commission, CBN, director, they're all in there that came up. I didn't come up with this.
Right.
They presented their findings to me. They decided that 1 hour didn't make any sense because the income, on average, by the way, that you would generate from an hour will not be working. The 20 hours based on if you work for 20 hours, you might be able to generate enough income that might sort of equate to what working 1 hour in the US is.
Right.
Then you have a bit more comparison.
Gotcha.
So it doesn't. So the way it is done right now, all NBS has done. By the way, NBS is I have to state this before I end, is the official source of statistics.
Indeed.
They are the custodian of all Nigerian statistics. They are the ones that determine, who have the power to determine what they believe is the correct. Not me, whether ex-tertiary or not, and not anybody else. So if they decide that that's the best move, they have the right to decide. That's their prerogative, yes. But as speaking from the other side, it was easier for me to marry both because I'm also an economist, also a data user, and I was also producing data. So it was easier for me to compare both sides and understand that in producing this data for the people that want to use it, it has to make sense. And that's why it seemed to be a bit controversial. But no, I'm not, my main point is, do your international comparisons, fine, but ensure that what you produce is actually of use. The use, by the way, when you, under experience I got from my time there, when you don't fund your statistics agency properly, you have to listen to whatever. So if the World Bank or the UNDP are bringing their money, you're going to do exactly what they want. So if the World Bank insists that you must use 1 hour and they're promoting it, you don't do that. You lose. I had to turn down a lot of funding because I was being compelled to do a lot of things that I felt was not. It will fit international benchmarks, and they will do their research and their comparative studies, but it did not help in terms of giving policymakers the tools they needed to fix the country, and that is very, very important. If you tell the policymakers we have a 4% unemployment rate, you're basically telling them there's no unemployment problem.
Right, exactly.
And I'd rather you produce both. You set a benchmark, whatever it is, 20 hours, 10 minutes, whatever it is you want it to be. But that makes sense in the context of what they are trying to deliver. What they claim they are trying to deliver to the Nigerian poor. That's what you measure, that's what you monitor, and that's actually the most important objective of data. And that's my personal view.
Dr. Kale, this is why we brought you on the show. To break it down for the people, it has to be in line with the policy. You didn't tell me that.
You said you were bringing me to the show to talk about
GDP.
But it's fine.
Thank you, Dr. Kale. Maybe so what your thoughts? What do you make of this revision?
So like Dr. Sai said, I think first thing is it could easily be misconstrued. People could easily misunderstand what it means. I mean, anyone who's looking at the numbers, and when you see it, it looks like, oh, there's 3% in 2022, 5% in 2021, and 4% now. Like, oh my God, who's giving out these jobs, right? So people could easily misinterpret it. But I think one good thing about it, though, is that it highlights a bigger problem that Nigeria has, which is the underemployment problem. A lot of Nigerians are in wage jobs that are not rewarding and are not. They're largely underemployed rather, in terms of the number of hours they put into the work and in terms of the skills that they have and the kinds of jobs that they do. So we have situations where doctors, for instance, are taxi drivers. I mean, unfortunately, probably because, the medical profession isn't as rewarding. Just a hypothetical example. But we have situations like that, and they're quite rampant. So we have people, underutilizing their skills, and that is underemployment. Another thing is, and yet last year, the World Bank actually released a report about Nigeria's poverty. And one major highlight of that report was that work